Roving coral groupers and their close relative leopard coral groupers use a headstand signal to indicate the location of hidden prey to cooperative hunting partners of several types: giant moray eels, humphead wrasses, and big blue octopuses. Although the context is similar, this gesture is fundamentally different from the full-body shimmy because the headstand actually points to a fish or some other edible creature that has just hidden out of reach of the grouper. That makes it a referential gesture, which, outside of humans, had only previously been attributed to great apes and ravens, two groups known to be Einsteins of the animal world. The headstand signal meets the 5 criteria for referential gestures, as proposed by the biologist Simone Pica and Thomas Bugnier based on studies of communication in ravens. 1. It is directed toward an object. 2. It is purely communicative and mechanically ineffective. 3. It is directed toward a potential recipient. 4. It elicits a voluntary response. And 5. It demonstrates intentionality. This is neat stuff. Finger pointing is regarded as a critical communication and social skill and a crucial milestone in child development. When a child points at something, she is initiating joint attention, that is, she wants you to engage with the item of interest she is pointing at. The groupers were very patient, sometimes waiting for 10 and as many as 25 minutes over the location. Sometimes, a hunting partner was too far away to notice the grouper's pointing gesture. In those cases, the researchers witnessed the grouper swimming over to the moray and performing the body shimmy. The invitation often worked. The moray swam with the grouper back to the crevice where the prey was hidden. In a follow-up captive study, the same team concluded that the collaborative capacities of groupers compare favorably with those of chimpanzees. Groupers were given a choice to hunt with either of 2 realistic fake moray eels. One of the fakes was an effective collaborator that flushed out prey, whereas the other swam in the opposite direction. On the first day of testing, the groupers showed no preference for either of the fake eels. But by the second day they had identified the successful partner and preferred it at a rate that compared favorably to that of chimpanzees. When food was out of reach, and getting it required collaboration, the groupers also were at least as proficient as chimps at determining when they needed to recruit a collaborator, doing so in 83% of cases. The fishes learned more effective lithan chimps when a collaborator was not necessary. Does this imply that groupers are as smart as chimpanzees? No. How does one even compare the two when the ape lives on land and has grasping hands, while neither applies to the fish? What it does show is that when needs dictate, a fish is capable of performing smart, flexible behaviors. Alexander Vale thinks you could view the cooperative hunts of coral groupers and morays as a kind of social tool use. A chimp can get a stick and probe honey out of a hole. A grouper has no hands and can't pick up a stick. But it can use intentional communication to manipulate the behavior of a different species with the attribute it needs. The clever science writer Ed Yong summed it all up with a piece titled "When your prey's in a hole and you don't have a pole, use a moray." Democracy. For me, the beauty of the grouper hunting collaborations is their conscious intentionality. It is 2 fish minds working in concert to translate and transfer desires and intentions into favorable outcomes. Another way that desires may lead to social outcomes is through collective decision-making. One common property we see in animal groups, from schooling fish to flocking birds to primate groups, is that they effectively vote to decide where to go and what to do, says Ian Cousin, an evolutionary biologist at Princeton University. When one fish heads toward a potential source of food, the other fish vote with their fins on whether to follow, he adds. And this highly democratic process helps animals make decisions as a group that are better than those of any single member. A benefit of consensus decision-making is that speed and accuracy of decisions increase with group size, because they efficiently combine the diverse information possessed by group members. For example, misinformed golden shiners are less prone to committing an error when they are swimming in a group. It appears that groups either aggregate information into a quorum response, or they follow a few informed experts or leaders. Decisions on whom to follow may also be informed by the appearance of individual fishes. All else being equal, a healthier, more robust fish knows how to take care of himself, and may thus be considered a better decision-maker than a frilier individual. Might a fish make such a discrimination? To investigate, a collaborative team of biologists based in Sweden, the UK, the United States, and Australia designed experiments in which stickleback fishes were introduced into the center of a plexiglass tank that contained two identical refuges of attractive rocks and vegetation situated in opposite ends of the tank. Near the rear wall of the tank, starting in the center, a pair of plastic models of sticklebacks swam toward opposite refuges by being towed at constant speed along a monofilament wire. One of the models in a pair was made to look healthier than the other. For example, a larger model looks fitter than its smaller counterpart because it appears to be a better forager and a longer-term survivor. A plumper model with a distended abdomen also appears better fed, whereas a model with dark spots looks like it might be harboring parasites. The sticklebacks behaved as if they had previewed the study plan. When just one fish was presented with two models, it followed the healthier-looking model to its refuge about 60% of the time. Performance steadily improved with group size to over 80% in groups of 10 sticklebacks. This is an example of consensus decision-making. Upon others that combat is not a good idea. They make themselves look as big as possible by spreading their fins, opening their gill covers, or performing a lateral display to show their full size. Booming sounds accentuate size and strength, while water-displacing tail beats add physical force to these saber-rattling displays. Other embellishments include head shakes, body twists, showing off brightly colored body parts, or performing color changes. Not all displays are intended to show aggression. Fishes also appease. An effective appeasement display involves exposing vulnerable body parts, a tactic that boosts the authenticity of the gesture, as when wolves expose the throat, or monkeys the genitals. The aggressively territorial blunt-head cichlid appeases another with a quiver display involving the presentation of the luminous yellow band around the fish's vulnerable midriff. If troubles nevertheless escalate, cichlids may act as peacemakers. This happens in the golden buna, another Malawian cichlid. In captive settings, these butter-colored beauties with white-trimmed black racing stripes along their sides form a linear dominance hierarchy, and most interactions occur between dominance-rank neighbors. A male will actively intervene in female-female disputes. He breaks up the altercation without favoring either combatant. If one of the females is unfamiliar, she is favored, and his intervention has been shown to increase the chances that the new female will settle in the group. That, of course, is a most welcome addition for the male, who gains a new potential mate. Animal hierarchies commonly line up according to body size, with larger individuals ranking higher. As with the alpha male elk who gathers a harem and seeks to keep other males from mating with his females, in some fish societies only the largest male gets to mate with an available female. A subordinate male risks having to fight with a larger male if he is within about 5% of the bigger one's size. A loss could bump him down a few notches in the mating queue. What is a little fish to do? In an admirable show of restraint, male gobies of various species deliberately limit their food intake to retain their place in the queue. But dieting gobies are not wearing halos. Restraint might yield long-term benefits. In their social groups, which number a dozen or so, a goby normally moves up the community ladder only when a superior dies. Since dieting has been shown to improve longevity in many animals, fasting might also be a good long-term strategy to become a breeder. In a social setting, restraint and cordiality are the defaults for even the most pugnacious of creatures. One day, pity compelled Lori Cook of Tampa, Florida, to rescue some Siamese fighting fishes isolated in cups at a local Walmart store. She took good care of them, setting them up in a small background pond. As her local reputation as a fish friend grew, so did her collection of bettas, as unwanted fishes from the neighborhood were delivered to her. She also eventually acquired some females from a PetSmart at $1 each. Female bettas have little interest for most pet shoppers because they are not aggressive, and we perceive them as drab. Lori's experience with these fish testifies their combative reputation. Every morning, she would go out to feed them and they would gather at the pond edge for food. Since bettas are tropical and even in southern Florida temperatures might get too low for them, she uses an aquarium heater during the colder months. Despite having now kept many generations of Siamese fighting fishes, many of whom are males, Laurie observes, I have never, ever, seen two males fighting, nor have I ever seen any evidence of fighting, such as bites or mutilated fins. Why are these supposed warrior fishes so passive? Probably because getting along is better than fighting. One of the problems with pitting male bettas against each other is the artificiality of captivity, which thwarts the natural urge for a loser to flee. The subordinate's efforts to defuse the situation by removing himself are blocked, creating the possible impression for the dominant fish that his rival has changed his mind and wishes to fight again. This, I suspect, is why contests staged in a tank can, reportedly, end in death. The mental powers of bettas aid them in avoiding dangerous fights. Studies by Rui Oliveira and his colleagues at the ISPA Instituto Universitario in Lisbon find that rival males monitor other males' performances in disputes, and they show greater deference to known winners than to losers. Males who had watched other male contests were less eager to approach and display at males whom they had seen winning compared to males they had seen losing, whereas there was no such discrimination between unseen winners and losers. Deception. With all this restraint, cooperation, and peacemaking going on in fishdom, you could be excused for thinking every fish is an angelfish. Not so fast. As we saw with the cleaner client symbiosis, any form of cooperation or social interaction opens up opportunities to manipulate for personal gain. Like humans, fishes deploy a dizzying array of visual and behavioral deceptions to fool others. It isn't a big leap from fish to selfish. Some deceptions are simple ploys to evade detection by predators. During their most vulnerable period as small juveniles, many fishes mimic other creatures that advertise their toxicity with gaudy colors. The shape and color of a juvenile pinnate batfish is strikingly similar to that of a toxic flatworm, while black spots on a pearly white background render a young barramundi cod into a doppelganger for another toxic flatworm species. Behavioral embellishments can magnify the deception. In 2011, Gotthard Kopp of the University of Göttingen, Germany, captured on film a superb example of mimicry by a fish off the coast of Indonesia. As Kopp filmed a mimic octopus, itself a masterful imitator of other marine organisms, creeping across the sand on a foraging foray, he noticed a black marble jawfish flickering among octopus's tentacles. The fish bore the exact coloration and markings of the cephalopod and enhanced her camouflage by orienting her body parallel to the invertebrate's arms. Scientists reporting the association speculated that the deception allows the jawfish, which otherwise spends most of its adult life near the safety of a sand burrow, to venture farther away from its home den to forage in relative safety. This is one of the only known examples of a mimic mimicking a mimic. The tools of mimicry and camouflage are not only available for avoiding predation, they are also used by predators to sneak up on their prey. In freshwaters of both South America and Africa, leaf fishes have evolved to mimic dead and decaying leaves that float or sink to the bottom. Through a combination of visual and behavioral trickery, these patient hunters catch small fishes who stray too close. Leaf fishes position themselves strategically, floating or dangling to blend in optimally with the available foliage. Their tiny, transparent pectoral fins work in overdrive to hold them in position. A ragged, fleshy protrusion from the chin looks just like a decaying petiole, a tasty morsel to an unsuspecting goby. Once the little fish is within range, the predator engulfs it in the vacuum created by its extensible jaws. It's over in less than a quarter second. In a morbid variation on the leaf fish's deception, some cichlids of the Nimbochromis genus in East Africa's Lake Malawi feign death by lying limply on their sides on the lake bottom when an inquisitive scavenger comes to investigate. The corpse springs to life, seizing and consuming the curious investigator. Trumpet fishes and pipe fishes combine. 2. Popular children's games to sneak up on their prey, they play hide and seek by riding piggyback on parrotfishes. The small fishes they are hoping to catch are unfazed by the vegetarian parrotfish, and they often fail to notice the pipefish, who slides off to attack any who come within range. Trumpet fishes will also join a passing school of smaller fishes, avoiding easy detection by possible prey as they lurk within the crowd. This cunning is impressive in itself, but I find no less fascinating the tolerance shown by the accomplices they hide among, who appear to be unafraid of this predator in their midst. Living in the perpetually dark oceanic abyss, deep-sea anglerfishes do not need to hide. But they are famous for their own brand of deception, in the form of dorsal fins that function as convincing fishing lures. Chances are you've heard of anglerfishes, whose bizarre shapes and gaping mouths remind me of the gargoyles that decorate medieval church facades. Perhaps you didn't know that it is only females whose dorsal fin nature has wrought into a filamentous stalk, referred to by specialists as the elysium, on the end of which resides the luminescent lure, or esca. Deep-sea anglerfishes are a diverse group numbering 160 known species, and their lures come in an array of temptations that would challenge any fisherman's tackle box. Some lures resemble a worm, which the anglerfish causes to squirm appealingly by twitching muscles at the base of the stalk. In species that live in shallow waters, these lures are brightly colored. Those of deep-sea anglerfishes, who live beyond the light's penetration, trade color for light, which is produced by bioluminescent bacteria living in special compartments built into the filament. In some species, the tip of the esca bears a lens, which transforms the adjustable filament into an elaborate, tubular light guide, nature's answer to fiber optics. In another species, the lure is wriggled within the anglerfish's mouth, sealing the fate of any little fish who ventures unsuspectingly inside. Is an anglerfish aware of the deception she is creating when she wriggles her dorsal fin lure? It is one of the challenges of any question relating to animals' mental lives. The skeptic can claim that the fish has no awareness of what it is doing, pointing to insects that use mimicry to fool birds and other would-be predators. While I do not wish to disparage insects, anglerfishes, leaf fishes, and trumpet fishes are not members of that invertebrate group. They are full members of the vertebrate league, with brains, senses, biochemistry, and minds befitting that status. Making a living as a fish in the inky depths requires considerable resourcefulness and know-how, especially when your prey are other vertebrates with minds of their own. To this point, I've explored how fishes perceive their worlds, how they feel both physically and emotionally, their thoughts, and their social lives. The main conclusion we may draw from these aspects of what a fish knows is that fishes are individuals with minds and memories, able to plan, capable of recognizing others, equipped with instincts and able to learn from experience. In some cases, fishes have culture. As we've seen, fishes also show virtue through cooperative relationships both within and between species. There is one vital aspect of a fish's social life that I have yet to explore, and it is the ultimate aim of all organisms, to make more of themselves. When the time is right, the urge to reproduce rivals that most basic need to find food. True to their diversity, fishes have devised an ocean's worth of methods to procreate and to parent. Part 6. How a fish breeds. How do you spell love? Piglet, you don't spell it. You feel it. Pooh. Milne. Sex lives. Fishes are characterized by a level of sexual plasticity and flexibility that is unrivaled among other vertebrates. Thavamani J. Pondian, Sexuality in Fishes. True to their magnificent diversity of forms, fishes exhibit a full monty of breeding systems, 32 in all. They have as many different kinds of reproductive behaviors and strategies as exist in all the other vertebrates combined. There are promiscuous fishes, polygamous fishes, and monogamous ones, including fishes that mate for life. Depending on his sexual playbook, a male fish may keep a harem, defend a territory, spawn in a group, engage in sneak copulations, bide his time as a satellite male, or commit acts of sexual piracy. And as we'll see, females are not passive accessories. The great majority of fishes exhibit a familiar pattern with an obscure name, gonochorism, in which individuals are either male or female throughout life. But you can guess what that implies. There are scores of fishes who cross gender lines. For some reason, reef living in particular has had a diversifying effect on sexual expression. More than 1/4 of all fishes on a reef can transition from male to female, or vice versa, with no need for expensive surgery. Other fishes opt for a unisex approach, assuming both male and female identities simultaneously, or sequentially out of the species that produce both sperm and eggs at the same time. Most are found in the vast darkness of the deep sea. Being able to fertilize yourself is a very useful adaptation where the daily prospects of finding another of your kind are almost as dim as your surroundings. The sex-changing fishes are not so restricted, and they benefit by being different sexes at different ages and sizes. For example, in a mating system in which one male may monopolize many females, it pays to start out as a female, then become a male when you are large and more physically capable of rebuffing the challenges of competitors. Often, all younger members of a species are females, with a harem male occupying the top dog position. In other cases, the chain of command is reversed, with a string of lesser males awaiting the future prospect of becoming a breeding female. The popular clownfishes of Finding Nemo fame rely on size, hierarchy, and sex change to maintain social order. They live in groups of 2 large and several smaller individuals. The big ones are the breeding pair, the larger of whom is the breeding female. The subordinates, all males, are ranked hierarchically according to size. Although these lower-ranking fishes may be as old as the spawning pair, the behavioral dominance of the sexually mature individuals keeps the subordinates from growing or developing. Hans and Simone Frick, who studied this strict mating system, described the low-ranking males as being, in essence, psychophysiologically castrated. Each retains his place in the queue until there is a job opening in the executive office. If the breeding female dies, the chief male changes sex to female and the next largest fish in the subordinate group bumps up to chief male. So there is always hope for a suppressed male in a clownfish family. All of this reveals a slight inaccuracy in the course of events in Finding Nemo. The fact is, upon Nemo's losing his mother, his dad, Marlin, should have become his new mother. Sex-changing fishes behave appropriately, performing male-typical or female-typical sexual behaviors according to their current gender assignment. Sexual behavioral plasticity can also be observed in fishes that do not normally change sex, but who are subjected to hormonal manipulation. Although how this happens is not clear in a fish, results of field and laboratory observations suggest that some bony fishes have a sexually bipotential brain that can manage 2 types of behaviors, unlike most other vertebrates, which have a discrete sex differentiation of their brain and can only perform gender-typical sexual behavior. The ability of individual fishes to change sex shows just how fluid gender divisions can be in nature. If you are at all tuned into societal trends, you'll know that gender lines are becoming more blurred in humans, too. The book Becoming Nicole, for example, explores the social challenges faced by a human family whose son, an identical twin, sought gender reassignment at an early age. As medical advances expand our options to assert our true gender identities, we unwittingly become more like a fish. Seducing with artistry. Once you know what sex you are, there is still the matter of whom to mate with. It is not a trivial decision. A sex partner is going to be the one who supplies the other half of the genes that go into your kids, so you want them to be of good quality. It helps to have ways of evaluating the caliber and desirability of a prospective mate. That's where courtship comes in. We date, dine, go to dances, share gifts, and use other methods to test prenuptial waters. So, in their own ways, do many fishes, who seduce prospective partners with dance sequences, love songs, and sensual touches. And, in at least one kind of fish, with art. We do not typically think of fishes as artists, at least not beyond the sort of passive artistry to be found in the beautiful patterns and colors many fishes display on their bodies. But art is what surprised the veteran Japanese diver and photographer Yoji Ukeda during a dive off the southern tip of Japan. At a depth of about 80 feet lay a 6-foot-wide symmetrical circular pattern in the sand. The mural featured 2 concentric rings of ripples radiating outward from a center disc. It was as though a 500-foot-tall giant had waded into the ocean and pressed his thumbprint into the sand. Mystified as to what might have created this exquisite curiosity, Ukeda returned some days later with a film crew, and the mystery was soon solved. The geometric crop circles were created by a small, quite ordinary-looking male pufferfish. Swimming on his side while fluttering a pectoral fin, the 5-inch puffer spends hours making his masterpiece. He inspects it as he goes, decorating his mural with bits of small shells that he cracks in his mouth, before sprinkling them into the central grooves. Mandalas made by other males have been found since. No two are the same. There appear to be several functions of these structures. Chiefly, they attract female puffers who, all going well, lay their eggs in the inner circle. The furrows help prevent eggs from being carried away by currents, and the crushed shells probably enhance this effect while providing camouflage for the eggs. Males who build more elaborate circles appear to have better mating success, which drives the evolution of this elaborate artistry. While the little Japanese pufferfish might be a Piscine Picasso, he is not alone among fishes in using sand as a medium for aesthetic expression. Like the Australian bowerbirds famous for the elaborate structures they build to attract and impress females, many cichlid fishes also build bowers to improve their mating prospects. The comparison to bird bowers is not superficial. For much like those of their distant feathered relatives, the fish's bowers function mainly as way stations for display, courtship, and spawning. Almost as soon as eggs are laid, females pick them up in their mouths and move to a safer brooding location. How do we safish build a bower? Lacking grasping appendages, male cichlids must use their mouths to pick up and deposit sand, and their fins to waft it. Each species constructs a bower of different design, from simple depressions to arenas with radiating spokes to volcano-shaped sand castles projecting a foot or more from the bottom with a courting platform at the top. The height or depth of these aquatic edifices advertises the male's health and the quality of his genes. The engine that drives these efforts by males is choosy females, who can detect subtle variations in a male's quality. When females preferentially mate with males with superior architectural skills, building prowess is favored over the generations. Male sticklebacks also use their mouths to build their mating bowers, but they have an extra tool to aid them. They produce a sticky, mucus-like substance in their kidneys. When it comes time to decorate house, a male extrudes this thread-like glue through his cloaca and uses it to bind together pieces of leaves, grass, and algae filaments to his nest. In a study of 3-spined sticklebacks off the west coast of Sweden, Sarah Ostlund Nielsen and Michael Holmlund from the University of Oslo noted that males chose algae of deviant coloration to adorn the entrances to their nests, an apparent decoration. When the researchers placed bits of shiny tin foil and bangles nearby, the male fishes didn't waste any time plucking them up and using them to decorate. Flashier nests attracted more females, despite their being less camouflaged against predators. Humans and bowerbirds are not the only creatures who like a bit of bling. Fake orgasms and sperm drinking. Artistry is just one way to win a mate. Another is that familiar old tactic, deception. As we've seen, fishes are not above a little trickery. In the case of a female brown trout, it takes the form of a fake orgasm. Having made a depression in the sand that serves as a nest, a female trout normally releases her eggs with vigorous body quivering in the presence of an amorous male. Caught up in the moment and seizing his opportunity, the nearby male follows the female's lead, furiously quivering while releasing his sperm into the water. But sometimes he has been duped. Her own quivers were eggless. It isn't clear why a female trout might practice this deception. One possibility is that she is testing the male's vigor. Or maybe she has decided that he is not the one for her and she seeks to draw in other males in hopes of finding a better father. This sort of reproductive conflict is common in nature. A male can afford to fertilize all of a female's eggs with his abundant, cheap sperm and still have more left over for other females. A female, in contrast, may do better by having several sires for her precious eggs, improving her odds that some will be fertilized by the best quality males. Female cardinal fishes have a deception of their own. Or do they? Males protect the female's eggs by gingerly carrying them in their mouths. It's a major self-sacrifice on dad's part, for he must forego eating during this critical period of the reproductive cycle. Sometimes it is just too much for a starving male to bear, and he has been known to swallow the whole egg bunch in one gulp. In a ploy to lessen the chances of this unwelcome outcome, cardinal fish moms will lay a number of yolkless dummy eggs along with the real ones. The theory is that these fakes trick dad into thinking he has more future offspring in his mouth, and that the clutch is therefore more worthy of careful protection. I find this interpretation unconvincing, for it assumes an exploitative partnership when a virtuous one might serve just as well. Perhaps we'll discover that females produce so-called trophic eggs to reward males for their investment, with males discriminating faux eggs from fertilized ones, eating the former and saving the rest. After all, the fertilized eggs contain his investment, too. Among the diverse cichlids of Lake Malawi, it is the males who tweak their partners with eggy stimuli, this time in the form of egg mimicry. A female deposits her eggs on the substrate before collecting them in her mouth. As an aid to fertilization, the male wears a tattoo of yellow spots on his anal fin, giving the 3D impression of a small group of eggs. The little cluster is irresistible to females. Drawn close to the male's reproductive organs, the female inhales most of the sperm he ejaculates, where it may better fertilize the eggs already in her mouth. This has been described as an apparent visual deception, but I doubt the male's egg spots act as a trick so much as a stimulus. Procreation is as vital to females as to males, so perhaps the female is not so much deluded as excited by the male's seductive visual signal. Oral sex plays a more direct role in fertilization for the armored catfishes, Corydoras, a popular genus of the aquarium trade. The female drinks semen directly from the male by attaching her mouth around his genital opening. The sperm pass rapidly through the female's digestive tract, and she releases them onto a freshly extruded cluster of about 30 eggs that she holds between her pelvic fins. I doubt I am the only one wondering how the sperm are not destroyed by the female's digestive enzymes. It helps that the semen is shunted through the female's gut at astonishing speed. A Japanese research team timed the sperm's passage in 22 females by squirting a puff of blue dye into the female's mouth at the moment she inhaled the male's sperm. Then they waited for a cloud of blue to emerge from the female's anus. Surely, this loss of privacy is exacerbated by indignity. They didn't have to wait long. Average time, 4.2 seconds. These little catfishes have another adaptation that may facilitate rapid sperm passage and survival in the female's gut. They use intestinal air breathing, gulping air at the surface and passing it quickly through their intestines. So the digestive system of corvidoras appears pre-adapted for passing sperm quickly and unharmed through their bodies. Why would fishes resort to such a dramatic means of fertilizing their eggs? For one thing, both parents know whose genes are being combined, which is good if you've chosen your mate carefully. A related advantage for the male is that he knows it is his sperm and only his sperm fertilizing the female's eggs. Whatever the ultimate benefits, sperm drinking certainly works for catfishes, for it is believed to occur in as many as 20 species. A female's gut might not be the most bizarre place to combine sperm and eggs. What about the innards of an invertebrate? One of the most elegant symbioses in the oceans involves a curious sexual arrangement between bitterlings, small fishes of European streams, and mussels. When it comes time to mate, a female bitterling finds a suitably sized mussel of the Unio genus in which to lay her eggs. How does she get her eggs inside a tight-lipped mussel? The bitterling mother-to-be uses a long, hose-like egg-laying tube to insert her eggs into the bivalve siphon, itself a tube-like structure used by the mollusk for filtering water and food. Once the eggs are inside the mussel, the male bitterling releases his sperm near the siphon entrance, some of which is inhaled with themself over the ensuing days. The bitterling's fertilized eggs hatch and develop in the safety of their molluscan cloister. That sounds all well and good for the bitterlings, but how, if at all, does the mussel benefit from being a bitterling's brood receptacle? The answer is that the mussel does not release the bitterling fry until its own eggs have properly ripened. The mussel's eggs adhere temporarily to the baby fishes, which provide a convenient egg dispersal service for the mollusk. Like the clasping seeds of certain plants that stick to animals' fur for a free dispersal service, the mussel's eggs get a head start on finding fertile new terrain to establish themselves. One good deed deserves another. Manipulation with a feminist twist. I've seen pictures of a female bitterling siphoning her eggs into the clam's inner sanctum like a fueling nozzle at a gas station, and I wonder if she is cognizant of how eccentric is her mode for production. It seems he must know instinctively what to do, unless she learns it by watching other spawning females. The mating behavior of a male Atlantic molly seems less instinctual, for he varies his conduct according to the social setting. Specifically, he deceives rival males by pretending he's attracted to someone else. Male mollies have an intermittent organ called a gonopodium, a fleshy appendage supported by a bone, which functions as a penis. A male can signal his sexual interest in a female by nipping her and thrusting his gonopodium toward her. In a study led by Martin Plath, male Atlantic mollies were presented with pairs of females with and without an audience. First, males were placed singly in tanks with a pair of females and allowed to show their preference. In the next phase of the experiment, males were again presented with the same two females, but half of the males were now being watched by a rival male placed in a transparent cylinder at the back of the tank. Control males who lacked an audience showed no change in female preference. However, almost all of the males who were being watched by a rival started to act as if they preferred the formerly non-preferred female. They made the switch from a larger to a smaller Atlantic molly, and they even made the switch from a female of their own species to a close relative, the Amazon molly. It is thought that a male molly does this with the purpose of steering his rival's attentions away from a more desirable female. Earlier studies found that male mollies are influenced by the preferences of rivals, including a switch from an Atlantic to an Amazon molly. The ploy may act to further reduce sperm competition, because nearby males may use this public information to copy the original male's feigned mate choice. By deflecting rival males' attentions to a different female, the first male improves his odds in the sperm lottery with his preferred mate by raising the proportion of her eggs he is likely to fertilize. There is a feminist twist to this story of molly manipulation. Unlike their close cousins, the Atlantic mollies, female Amazon mollies are an all-female species. There are no males. There are a few other all-female species among reptiles, amphibians, fishes, and birds. These species are referred to as parthenogenetic because no sperm is required to fertilize their eggs. But the situation is even more peculiar in Amazon mollies, because they can produce fertile eggs only if they mate with a male molly of another species. Although the mating act is necessary to trigger pregnancy, it's a case of sperm donor-like for males, whose sperm do not actually fertilize the female's egg. Therefore, male mollies who mate with Amazon mollies are the victims of an immaculate deception. You may be wondering why natural selection would tolerate males mating with females with whom their sperm reaches a dead end. These males appear to be benefiting by boosting their desirability to female Atlantic mollies. Several fishes, including mollies and their close relatives the guppies, are known to be trend-conscious, and Atlantic females often copy the choices made by their Amazon counterparts. Well-hung fish. Mollies are one, albeit bizarre, example of many fishes in which fertilization is internal. Most fishes mate without penetration, but there are many exceptions. All male elasmobranchs have claspers, paired organs that the male inserts into the female's genital opening for sexual intercourse. Among bony fishes, males of the family that includes guppies, mollies, platies, and swordtails all possess a gonopodium. Most of the time the gonopodium is directed backward, but when needed it can be swung in different directions. I remember an undergraduate animal behavior lab in which we recorded how often aroused male guppies made gonopodial swings and sigmoidals, an S-shaped body posture signaling readiness for sex. The flamboyantly colored males waved their gonopodia about like unruly wands, apparently to impress females. Although the guppies were tiny, most between 1 and 2 inches long, their gonopodia were about a fifth of their body length, making them easily observed and accounted for by students and female guppies. The Priapium. Fishes of the appropriately named Phallistethidae. Translation: chest penis. Also have penetrative sex. These are small, humble-looking creatures, numbering 23 species. Partially translucent, they live in brackish waters of Thailand and the Philippines. They are named for a muscular, bony copulatory organ, the priapium, found under the throat of males. Yes, you heard me right. In some species, the priapium is even accompanied by a fully functional testicle. Another feature of the priapium is a serrated hook, the tenactinium, which grasps and holds onto the female during the sex act. Careful anatomical study confirms that this remarkably complex apparatus is derived from the missing pelvic girdle and pelvic fins. It is a testament to the importance of sex that evolution would find it within itself to ditch a pair of useful fins in exchange for a copulatory aid. It's also a nod to the mystery of life that ancestors of these fishes seem to get along perfectly well without a priapium. Nobody knows why these penises have migrated toward the fish's head end. Dare I guess that having his penis located near his eyes makes a male priapium fish more likely to achieve an accurate approach for insertion? What do female fishes think of male fish parts? More to the point, does size matter in the fish world? It seems to for mosquito fishes, in which the gonopodium can extend to 70% of the length of a male's body. The biologist Brian Lungerhans from Washington University in St. Louis tested the size matters theory by placing a female mosquito fish into a tank and projecting an image of a male on each side. One male's gonopodium had been digitally manipulated to appear longer than the other. In every trial, the female swam toward the male with the longer organ. But ever-efficient nature poses restrictions on extravagance, and being well-hung comes with at least one liability for a male mosquito fish. Just as a peacock burdened with a tail 2 feet longer than the competition would be more likely to fall victim to a predator before he even had the chance to breed, mosquito fishes with larger organs are more vulnerable to their enemies. Big gonopodia produce more drag in the water, making their bearers easier to catch. Fittingly, males living in predator-infested lakes have smaller gonopodia than males in safer waters. By focusing on fishes with penetrative sex, I do not wish to demean those numerous fish species whose eggs and sperm are released in tathwater for so-called external fertilization. That style of breeding manifests in countless ways among fishes. Let me briefly provide one example, the complex nesting and mating behavior of sea lampreys, which defies the primitive stereotype these ancient jawless fishes are labeled with. Like salmons, they are anadromous, having both marine and freshwater stages in their life history. At spawning time, they surge upstream to build an oval nest 2 to 3 feet in diameter. A mated pair use their suction mouths to lift or drag stones to a pile upstream from the nest. In mating, the female grasps a rock with her mouth, the male grasps the female behind her head, then twines his body around hers, and then they both vibrate vigorously. This motion stirs up fine sand that sticks to the releasing eggs, helping them sink into the nest. Next, the parents separate and begin removing stones from above the nest and placing them on the downstream side, which performs two functions: loosening sand that further covers the eggs, and shoring up the nest cavity to secure the eggs in place. The parents repeat the whole process until all eggs are extruded. This odyssey has a Romeo and Juliet ending. The pair are so exhausted by the end that they soon die. As usual, what we know of the sexual behavior of fishes is only a fraction of what goes on. Of those species that have been studied, many were in artificial environments, which has the advantage of convenience, but which may have the unfortunate effect of suppressing sexual behaviors readily expressed in the wild. Captive lemon peel angelfishes, for example, do not show courtship activities normally associated with harem maintenance. We may wonder what marvels await discovery, or shall remain forever hidden in the depths. One thing we do know is that, for many fishes, reproduction does not end with sex. There are young to raise, and that leads to some creative problem solving. Parenting styles. No one is useless in this world who lightens the burden of it for anyone else. Charles Dickens. When I was 8, my teacher showed us a film about salmons who make the epic journey from the ocean back to their natal stream to spawn and die. We had to write a report on the film. My mother kept mine. Here's an excerpt. There had to be many eggs because salmon have many enemies and all the eggs would be eaten up. After a few weeks or so, there were about 15 eggs left. By a month, had fed a lot and grown big enough to recognize that they were salmon. Suddenly, a big object came swimming towards them. All the little fish swam for their lives. But most of them got caught and eaten up. It was a big pike. Tommy Buster Collection, thoughtful minstrel impression that a salmon's life is an unmitigated, earnest struggle, although I did have the good sense to conclude that while mating you would think they are fighting, but actually they are thoroughly enjoying it. Notwithstanding a young boy's sometimes laughable attempts to express facts, that film conveyed at least one other misconception about the lives of fishes. Despite what we're taught, that salmons complete their life cycles and die after spawning in their home streams, in fact, some males and many females turn right back around and return to the sea to regain their normal body condition and resume adult life. Years may pass before they respond again to the reproductive urge. The film also led me to think that fishes do not look after their babies. In fact, caregiving has evolved at least 22 different times in fishes. About 1 in 4 of all fish species, some 8,000 species, devote at least some form of caregiving to their offspring. The effort ranges from protecting eggs to looking after the young through their most vulnerable first few weeks of life. Many fishes, including sharks, are viviparous, that is, giving birth to live young. Some sharks have a placenta to nourish developing embryos through an umbilical cord before they are live-born. Despite these reminders of mammalian reproduction, fishes do not feed their babies milk as mammals do. Nonetheless, some species produce body substances that act as food for their young. The best known is the discus, a popular aquarium cichlid from South America. During several weeks of caring for their developing fry, discus parents allow their babies to feed on the protective mucus layer that covers their bodies. This isn't just any old mucus, it is grown from specialized thickened scales on the parents' flanks. It's a personal nutrition service with an immunity booster. The mucus is enriched with antimicrobial substances that help protect the babies from infections. Scientists are finding that immune boosters are not rare among fishes. A new family of peptide antibiotics called piscidins was isolated from fish mucus. Scrumptious slime is not the only milk substitute in fishdom. Recall those unfertilized trophic eggs that female cardinal fishes produce for the mouth-brooding males? Many sharks provide trophic eggs as an added food source to their developing embryos prior to birth. One species of catfish in Lake Malawi is known to feed trophic eggs to its free-swimming juveniles. The youngsters position themselves near the mother's vent and eat them as she extrudes them into the water. Caviar on the fly. Egg protection. Before baby fishes are born, expectant parents take on the role of protecting the eggs. One approach is to guard the eggs by chasing off intruders. True to their pugnacious nature, damselfishes are vigorously protective parents. On an hour-long snorkel at a small reef off of Key Largo, Florida, I saw only a handful of aggressive interactions between fishes, and almost all involved chases by yellowtail damselfishes. Tierney Thies, a world expert on fishes, describes an encounter with a damselfish protecting an egg clutch. The 5-inch fish grunted repeated warnings at Thies as she approached for a closer look. Failing to repel the giant diver, the damselfish darted in, snatched up a large strand of my hair in its tiny teeth, and yanked backward. So hard that I involuntarily yelped in pain, a cry that was immediately followed by spluttering as I flooded my mask laughing. Alternatively, parents may hide their eggs by constructing various types of nests or shelters, including cavities, elaborate structures made from plant materials, and rafts of bubbles blown from specialized saliva. Whitetail major damselfishes take a white glove approach. The mated pair clean their egg-laying site by sandblasting it. The parents pick up sand in their mouths and spit it with force against the chosen rock face. Then they fan the area with their fins. Finally, they remove any sand grains that remain stuck to the rock face by plucking them off with their mouths. A more fins-on approach to improving egg survival is to carry one's eggs, which may take the form of transporting them in the mouth or carrying them in a pouch, for which male seahorses are renowned. In the amazingly camouflaged ghost pipefishes, native to the tropical Indian Ocean, the female's pelvic fins fuse together, and the resulting pouch functions as a cradle. In true pipefishes, relatives of seahorses, it is the male who has the pouch. The male humphead of New Guinea carries his mate's eggs dangling like a bunch of grapes from a projection on his forehead. One bottom-dwelling catfish from Guyana actually wears its eggs. The parent rolls in the egg mass so that the eggs adhere to the skin, where they are overgrown by a new layer of skin until the embryos are developed enough to emerge from their unconventional wombs. South American cichlids, called banded acaras, lay their eggs on a loose leaf they have carefully chosen. The male and female of a mating pair often test leaves before spawning. They pull and lift and turn the candidate foliage, trying to select leaves that are easy to move. After spawning, both parents guard the eggs. When disturbed, the parent acaras often seize one end of the egg-carrying leaf in their mouth and drag it hastily to deeper and safer locations. I have special admiration for the spraying kerosene, named for their eccentric form of egg-carrying behavior. Rather than lay their eggs on underwater leaves, as the banded acaras do, these athletic fishes deposit them in the air, on overhanging leaves. The parents to be line up vertically just below the waterline, then, on some subtle, split-second cue, they leap upward, usually in unison, to the chosen leaf. Each leap culminates with the two fishes turning upside down and depositing sperm and about a dozen eggs. Talk about good timing! In this manner, several dozen translucent eggs end up adhering in a cluster on the target leaf. I've read that leaps can be 4 inches high, but watching a film of the behavior indicates that kerosenes can jump much higher. They can also buy more time to deposit their goods by clinging to the leaf for several seconds. The incubation period is very short, which is just as well because Dad must work in overdrive to keep the eggs moist. He does this by firing water onto the egg masses with a skillful tail flick. It must be an exhausting job, for splashing is performed at 1-minute intervals during the 2 to 3 days until the eggs hatch and the newborns drop into the water. When I encounter curious animal behaviors like this, I can't help wondering how they arise. How does a fish go from laying and caring for eggs in the water to the outlandish custom of depositing them on a leaf and spraying them with water? Surely, the answer must be, gradually, and in stages. In some ancient kerosene environment, perhaps there was a visual predator who was thwarted when the kerosenes laid their eggs on underwater leaves. Then, other predation pressures might have compelled an enterprising pair of characins to reach up with their loins and deposit their by now sticky eggs on low-hanging leaves just above the surface. In time, perhaps driven to greater heights by more determined aquatic predators, the characins developed their leaping skills. At every step of the way, some advantage must have accrued, else the behavior would not have been genetically favored in the population. Spraying characins are not the only fishes that place their eggs out of water. Various intertidal species, inhabiting the zone between high and low tide, make a specialty of airborne egg brooding. Pricklebacks, gunnels, and wolf eels coil their elongate bodies around their egg cluster as the tide recedes, trapping a small pool of water in which the eggs sit. It says something about the virtue of parental dedication that a fish will lie for many hours, exposed to air, to protect his or her future offspring. Further strategies for protecting eggs above the waterline include covering them with seaweed, burying them in the sand, and hiding them among rocks. There must be advantages: higher incubation temperatures, higher oxygen concentrations, and lower predation. Gargle, but don't swallow. The most ingenious method fishes have devised for protecting their young at their smallest and most vulnerable is to carry them in their capacious mouths. Mouth brooding, which includes carrying eggs or free-swimming babies, occurs in at least 9 fish families on 4 continents. In the latter case, when a family is threatened, the parent fish may signal danger by backing up slowly with the head down. The young approach and are sucked into the parent's mouth, only to be let out again when the danger has passed. It looks like vomiting in reverse. Cichlid fishes are mouth-brooding specialists, with 70% of the 2,000 known species using their mouths for daycare. The great diversity and success of the cichlid family may be due in part to this adaptation. It is probably because one can only fit so many babies inside one's mouth that brood sizes of cichlids are smaller than those of many other fishes. But smaller families are well compensated by a higher proportion of fry surviving infancy. Among the best-known groups of mouthbrooders are members of the genus Betta, which numbers more than 70 species. Some bettas protect their young in bubble nests, which might be an evolutionary precursor to mouth brooding. Bubble nests work well in stagnant water where bubble nesting bettas live. They keep the eggs and developing fry together, safe, moist, and close to the oxygen-rich atmosphere. But in moving water, such as a stream, a bubble nest is very difficult to maintain. Parents manipulate eggs with their mouths during the construction of bubble nests, so it is just a short evolutionary hop to holding the eggs in the mouth. One can imagine an ancestral fish, exiled into a new stream habitat, watching his bubbles float away, discovering through desperation that things go better if he puts his money where his mouth is. Mouth brooding has other advantages. A bubble nester is tied to the nest and cannot venture far from the homestead without risk of losing eggs, or fry mouthbrooders can move at will to keep themselves and their brood safe. And the eggs are kept well oxygenated by moving a current of water over them with every breath. Mouth brooding isn't just clever, it is virtuous. Typically, mouth brooding parents stop eating during the entire period that eggs or young are being harbored in the mouth. That's no small thing, for the mouth brooding period may last a month or more. No wonder that mouth brooders have been known to starve to death. It gets nobler still. The parent continues to take food into his or her mouth, but it isn't swallowed, at least, not by the parent. These morsels are instead fed to the young while they are holed up in the doting parent's mouth. For instance, as revealed in a study of wild blunt-head cichlids in Lake Tanganyika, mothers swim off to a quiet area of the lake to mouth brood for about 33 days. They take no food into the gut during this period, but their browsing rate increases to meet the needs of their growing offspring. For sheer restraint, that has to rank among the highest in the animal kingdom. Good dads. Blunt-head cichlids notwithstanding, guess who does the lion's share of the child care work among fishes? Dad. In contrast to the pattern on land, where mothers often shoulder most of the parental duties, the roles are usually reversed in fishes. Unavoidably, females continue to bear the costs of egg production, but it is usually males who take over from there. So it is the father betta who builds the bubble nest and who guards the developing eggs until the fry hatch. Sensing danger, it is he who shakes his pectoral fins close to the surface of the water, creating a wave that can be detected by young, who then swim to him for the safety of his oral cavity. So predominant is the male's role in mouth brooding that in some cases his face has evolved to better suit the task. When the heads of 9 cardinal fish species were closely examined, males were found to have longer snouts and jaws than females. The investigators further reasoned that the mouth's role in brooding young constrains another important function of these fishes' mouths: respiration. With precious space taken up by dozens of offspring, the caregiver's oxygen intake is compromised. This has spawned predictions that cardinal fishes may expect to face a grim future. Says David Bellwood of the School of Marine and Tropical Biology at James Cook University in Queensland, Australia, mouth brooding makes them more vulnerable to the effects of climate change. As ocean temperatures warm, these fish will need to breathe more, and the last thing they need is having a mouthful of offspring when they need oxygen. The champion fathers among fishes are the seahorses and their close relatives, the pipefishes. These males come about as close to being pregnant as it gets. The female releases her eggs into the male's abdominal pouch, where he fertilizes them and carries them until they hatch. Birthing involves contractions and contortions to expel the young from the pouch. There are significant pluses to this pregnant dad system. From a purely reproductive standpoint, dad gets the double benefit of paternity assurance and higher numbers of his children surviving to independence than if they were simply cast off to face the hazards of sea life alone. Paternity assurance is no trifling matter in nature. Whereas mothers, in return for the substantial energetic costs of pregnancy and child-rearing, know with certainty that their young are their own, fathers can rarely be sure. Ironically, this male-centered guardianship system actually shifts parental uncertainty to the female. Genetic analyses reveal that rates of monogamy in male seahorses can be as low as 10%, and males have been found carrying eggs from as many as 6 females. There is, however, evidence that females are also playing a numbers game by contributing eggs to more than one male pouch. Helpers. Paternity uncertainty is only one obstacle to realizing your reproductive potential. A shortage of resources to settle and grow a family is another problem. Nest sites, food availability, and suitable mates may all be in short supply, and this can lead to major compromises. As a graduate student, I met once a week with a small group of behavioral ecologists to discuss the latest research on cooperative breeding in birds. Such is the diversity of this phenomenon that entire courses and several books have been devoted to it. Cooperative breeding happens when one or more non-breeding adults forego the opportunity to breed in favor of assisting with the child-rearing duties of another adult pair of birds. The breeding pair are often, though not always, the helper's parents. Cooperative breeding is known from several hundred bird species, including babblers, jays, kingfishers, and hornbills. I took that course in 1989. Curiously, nobody ever mentioned cooperative breeding in fishes, even though it had already been documented years earlier in daffodil cichlids. Cooperative breeding is currently known from far fewer fishes than either birds or mammals, but the relative secrecy of fishes' lives means that many others may remain undiscovered. The best-known cooperative breeding fishes are those innovators, the cichlids. Helpers perform a variety of tasks relating to the care and protection of eggs and young, such as cleaning and fanning eggs and fry, removing sand and snails from the breeding area, and defending the parent's territory. Helping behavior in birds and mammals is thought to have evolved via kin selection. If opportunities to raise a family of one's own are limited, say, due to a lack of suitable nesting sites, then it makes more sense to help relatives than to just bide one's time and do nothing. Helping increases the helper's genetic fitness by benefiting kin who share the helper's genes. Helping also provides valuable training. As a future breeder, you are more likely to succeed in the lively arts of nest building, incubation, feeding of young, and nest defense if you have first completed a full apprenticeship. That said, you should still strike out and raise your own young if circumstances permit. For birds, supportive evidence comes from a study of Seychelles warblers who only began to show helping behavior after all high-quality nesting sites were occupied following introduction to a new island. Once the land grab was complete, compromise followed. Do fish helpers also help because they don't have any better options? Swiss researchers from the University of Bern set out to test this so-called ecological constraints hypothesis in an elaborate captive study of daffodil cichlids taken from the southern end of Lake Tanganyika. Daffodil cichlids are the darlings of researchers studying cooperative breeding in fishes. They are small, graceful fishes with large eyes, pinkish-yellow bodies, and long, wispy fins bordered with sky blue. Their social lives are no less colorful. Nest helping includes digging to remove sand from breeding shelters. Defending the nest by such maneuvers as mouth fighting, biting, ramming, spreading of fins or gill covers, head-down displays, and S-shaped body bends, and mollifying higher-ranking fishes with various submissive behaviors, including tail quivering, hook displays, and fleeing. In the Swiss lab, 32 pairs were set up in 32 breeding compartments of a 1,900-gallon circular tank with a dispersal compartment adjoining every 4 breeding compartments. In addition to ample amounts of sand, each breeding compartment and off to dispersal compartments contained 2 flowerpot halves serving as breeding shelters. Each breeding pair was also assigned a mixed pair of helpers, one larger than the other, both smaller than the breeders. That's 64 helpers in all. Helpers were trained to swim through small slots in the plexiglass partitions dividing the breeding from the dispersal compartment. These slots were too small for the larger breeders to swim through. Despite the disorientation of intercontinental transport, the fishes soon adjusted to their new surroundings. One breeding pair produced a clutch of eggs within 5 days of arrival, and all but one of the 32 breeding pairs produced at least one clutch of eggs during the 4.5-month experiment. Did helpers help or start their own families when they had the opportunity to do so? They started families. As predicted by the ecological constraints hypothesis, helpers who had access to a breeding shelter defected to the available dispersal compartment, paired up with another helper, and produced their own young. Larger helpers provided less help to their assigned breeding pair, and large helpers with access to their own breeding shelter grew more in size than those without a breeding shelter, which suggests that these fishes can strategically control their body size according to their breeding status. Of the helpers who bred, none mated with the other helper originally assigned to their breeding compartment, probably because the second helpers were smaller and thus perceived as less suitable for mating than one of the larger helpers from an adjoining breeding compartment. No breeding occurred in the dispersal compartments without breeding shelters, which illustrates the importance of proper breeding supplies. This cleverly designed study shows that for daffodil cichlids, as for many birds, helping is a compromise due to limited resources in the environment. It reminds me of volunteering at an organization or interning at a business as a prelude to being taken on as an employee or to starting one's own company. Helping others raise young is virtuous, but some daffodil cichlid helpers may be less virtuous than others, getting more out of the deal than an apprenticeship and an indirect genetic investment. A genetic analysis of wild daffodils at Kasikalawi Point, Zambia, found that while breeding females were the mothers of virtually all of their offspring, breeding males were siring less than 90%. In over a quarter of clutches, male helpers were getting in on the action. Genetic data collected from groups of daffodil cichlids from Lake Tanganyika revealed mixed parentage in 4 of 5 of the examined groups. This is not all bad news for the dominant breeding male, who in any event usually remains oblivious to the helper's indiscretion. Knowing they have a higher genetic stake in the clutch, transgressing helper males show more vigorous defense against egg predators than do subordinates not participating in reproduction, and they tend to stay closer to the breeding shelter. When helpers are temporarily prevented from helping, other group members compensate by increasing defense of the territory. After being returned to the nest site, the thwarted helpers increase their helping behavior, even though the scientists find no evidence of their being punished as slackers by the breeding pair. These dynamics are not alien to our human societies. Despite societal norms about monogamy and sexual fidelity, things often get messy, else we wouldn't have terms like cheating, cuckold, and paternity testing. Or fostering and adoption. Freeloaders. The virtuous act of nest helping has paved the way to a form of transgression in the world of fish parenting. It is what biologists call brood parasitism. As with helpers at the nest, brood parasitism is best known among birds. It is the art of laying one's own eggs in another's nest. Practice. It also be certain fishes, amphibians, and insects. Brood parasitism is an evolutionary freeloading strategy in which someone else does the work of protecting and raising one's young. Many avian brood parasites will remove a host egg when they lay one of their own in a nest. In cases where the host nestlings are significantly smaller than the parasite nestling, the parasite gets most of the food, and the host's own chicks may starve to death. In its grimmest form, some brood parasites, particularly cuckoos, will eliminate eggs or newly hatched nestmates either by ejecting them from the nest or killing them with a sharp hook on the baby cuckoo's beak, which falls off after a few days. Others, such as the giant cowbird, are not known to harm the oripendula or cacique chicks whose nests they parasitize, and there is evidence for a beneficial trade-off when the interloper chicks pluck parasitic botfly maggots from their nestmates. Among fishes, the best-known examples of brood parasitism occur in the large African lakes where fish social behavior has found some of its most elaborate expression. In Lake Malawi, a research team from Penn State University found evidence of brood parasitism in 11 of 14 Campango catfish nests by one of the lake's most common catfish species, an endemic named the bomb by locals. Parasitized Campango nests held bomb young almost exclusively, and these were protected by Campango adults until they were about 4 inches long. In the Campangos, both females and males feed their young. The mother provides trophic eggs, for which the young fishes gather expectantly around her vent. The father collects invertebrates from the surrounding habitat, brings them back to the nest, then distributes them to the hungry offspring through his gill covers. In the parasitized broods, bomb babies fed side by side with Campango babies. As yet, nobody knows whether the bomb young instinctively know the feeding regime of their adoptive parents, or whether they learn it. Parasitism of Campango catfishes by bombs might be more the exception than the norm. Before making the brood parasitism observations in early 2007, Jay Stauffer had logged more than 1,600 hours of diving in Lake Malawi, but had never witnessed this behavior. And it isn't as if bombs are habitual freeloaders of Campangos, they will also care for and rigorously defend their own broods. Stauffer was bitten on the hand when he trespassed too close to videotape a bomb nesting area. At least the bombs are somewhat civil in their parasitic relations with their Campango hosts. 500 miles northwest, in Lake Tanganyika, aptly named cuckoo catfishes spawn right above breeding cichlids, and the cichlids dutifully mouthbrood the catfish's eggs and young. Adding insult to audacity, the catfish's eggs hatch earlier than the host's eggs, and once their yolks have been absorbed, the baby catfishes start eating their cichlid broodmates. When the zoologist Tetsu Sato of Kyoto University reported this in 1986, it was the first known fish example of true brood parasitism, in which the young of the imposter species are totally dependent on another species' parents. If there is one overarching conclusion we can draw from the current science on fishes, it is this: fishes are not merely alive, they have lives. They are not just things, but beings. A fish is an individual with a personality and relationships. He or she can plan and learn, perceive and innovate, soothe and scheme, experience moments of pleasure, fear, playfulness, pain, and, I suspect, joy. A fish feels and knows. How does that knowledge mesh with our relationship to fishes? Part 7. Fish out of water. A many-fingered horror of daylight to him, have made him die. From Fish, by D. H. Lawrence. It isn't easy being a fish, especially in an age of humans. Humans have fished since time immemorial. Eons before livestock were corralled in fences, fishes were being caught on hooks and in nets. The oldest fishhook ever found so far dates to between 16,000 and 23,000 years ago. The earliest known fishing net was discovered in 1913 by a Finnish farmer while digging a ditch in a swampy meadow made of willow fibers. The almost 100-foot-long by 5-foot-wide net was carbon dated to 8300 BC. I doubt the early fishermen wielding their hooks or tossing their nets in the shallows fretted about catching all the fish in what to them must have seemed a boundless ocean stretching beyond the horizon. And they needn't have. Indigenous fishing communities have been living in harmony with wild fishes for as long as recorded time. Long-term survival demands a sustainable balance between their needs and the fishes. It's a different story in the modern world, where fishing is not just done for subsistence but for profit. Well into the 20th century, it was widely believed that the world's waters contained an unlimited supply of fish. A few years back, I rescued an old book from an alleyway trash heap. In Animal Life of the World, published the year of my mother's birth, 1934, H.J. Shepstone writes, "Though every year fish are taken from the sea in millions of tons, yet there are no signs that this store will ever become depleted." Much the same was said of the passenger pigeon. And we know how that turned out. Mr. Shepstone failed to account for two trends that were already well in evidence in his day. The first is the steady growth in the number of humans on Earth. All else remaining the same, that growth translates into more consumption. Even if per capita consumption of fishes remained unchanged, about 3 times more fish would be eaten today simply because world human population has tripled since Shepstone's essay was published. Today, consumption of fish has grown dramatically in the world's 2 most populous nations. The average Chinese citizen eats 5 times more fish than in 1961, and the average Indian more than 2 times. During that half-century, the populations of these nations have also more than doubled. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, the average human in 2009 was consuming 46 pounds of fish, nearly double what she was consuming in the 1960s. In the United States, per capita fish consumption has remained fairly constant, which still represents a large increase because there are more Americans, and we are also feeding more fish to other animals we eat. Any notion that these increases might reflect rising fish populations is an illusion. The opposite is true. Global fish numbers are shrinking, and the number of collapsed fisheries has grown steadily since 1950. Isn't that a paradox? How can humans be eating ever more fish when the fish's populations are falling? Anybody who thinks there can be limitless growth in a static, limited environment is either mad or an economist, quips the British biologist and television presenter Sir David Attenborough. This brings us to the second trend absent from Mr. Shepstone's calculus, the steady advance of technology. It has transformed commercial fishing. Today's vessels can track down fish schools with sonar, satellite navigation, depth sensors, and detailed maps of the ocean floor. Some deploy spotter planes, others CISA helicopters, nets so durable, lightweight synthetic fibers, some miles long, are cast into the sea. Purse seines a mile in length and 250 yards deep encircle schools of sardines, herrings, and tunas near the surface. The net is then drawn together at the bottom for hauling on board. In longline fishing, lines with 2,500 or more hand-baited hooks, some stretching to over 60 miles, hang at various depths below the surface, or may be weighted to lie at the bottom, half a mile down. Huge winches haul the catch on deck. The most destructive and indiscriminate of all fishing methods is bottom trawling. A trawler is like a lawnmower with a big weighted net to catch the cuttings. Armed with heavy metal rollers, these nets are dragged across the seafloor at depths of half a mile to a mile, indiscriminately scooping up everything in their path. 100 years of structure on the bottom, corals, sponges, sea fans, etc., which provide vital spawning habitat for fishes, is seriously damaged or destroyed by one pass of a trawl net. Fishes of all ages and sizes, plus seaweeds, anemones, sea stars, and crabs, are removed or destroyed. The celebrated American oceanographer and TED Prize winner Sylvia Earle likens trawling to using a bulldozer to catch hummingbirds. The fishing vessels themselves are not so much boats as seaborne factories, complete with refrigeration and canning operations for storing their catch. If their cargo reaches capacity, they can transfer the catch to collection vessels, avoiding a time-wasting return to port. They stay at sea for weeks or even months at a time. And there are lots of these factory ships, more than 23,000 weighing 100 tons or more, plying the world's oceans. Commercial fishing in the modern era is like bobbing for apples with hands instead of the mouth. The fishes don't stand a chance. Today, how many we take is no longer limited. By how many we can catch, but by how many there are left to be taken. Reared. The alternative to catching wild fishes in the sea is to rear them in captivity. Fish farming is the fastest-growing animal food-producing sector in the world, having gone from 5% of global fish production in 1970 to about 2/5 of the total today. Aquaculture works on the same principle as factory farming of land animals. Fishes are kept in highly dense conditions, fed on a rich diet formulated to maximize growth, then slaughtered and processed for human consumption. Instead of crates and battery cages, farmed fishes are confined to marine and freshwater net pens, or land-based tanks or ponds. On trout farms, densities can be as high as 27-foot-long fishes per bathtub volume of water. At first glance, aquaculture might appear to be a savior for fishes in the wild. The reality is more complicated. Paradoxically, the production of factory-farmed fish does not relieve the pressure on wild fish populations. This is because the primary food fed to farmed fishes is, well, fish. Human diners have a taste for carnivorous fishes, whose natural diet is smaller fishes. Most of the prey fish captured on the seas are fed not to humans, but to farmed fishes and to pigs and chickens on factory farms. More than half the world's fish oil production is fed to farmed salmons, and 87% is used in aquaculture. How many fishes does it take to grow other fishes to marketable size? It varies. According to one analysis from 2000, it takes between 2 and 5 pounds of feed fish to make 1 pound of farmed carnivorous fish such as salmon, sea bass, or bluefin tuna. Given the smaller size of feed fishes, many individuals must be used to maintain the farmed species. The most notable of the uncelebrated feed fishes is a species you have likely never seen or heard of, and almost certainly haven't eaten. The menhaden is a humble-looking fish inhabiting both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. About 1 foot in length, and with a classical oval shape, forked tail, and bright silvery scales, these filter feeders would be a suitable exemplar for fish in an illustrated dictionary. So many menhadens are caught by humans that the cultural historian H. Bruce Franklin dubbed them the most important fish in the sea in his aptly titled book. A catch cap on Atlantic menhadens imposed in December 2012 by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission reduced the 2013 haul by 25%, or 300 million. That represents a prior annual regional catch of 1,200,000,000 individual menhadens. Like a third of the world's fish catch, menhadens are not eaten by humans. Menhaden derives from a Native American word for fertilizer. Their commercial use is to be reduced into oil, solids, and meal. Dead, dried, and then pressed, menhaden oil is used in cosmetics, linoleum, health food supplements, lubricants, margarine, soap, insecticides, and paints. Most of the menhaden meal, a product of pulverizing the dried carcasses of the fishes, is fed to factory-farmed poultry and pigs. Some also goes into pet food and feed for farmed fishes. One company, Omega Protein, was as of 2010 operating 61 ships, 32 spotter planes, and 5 production facilities, all dedicated to the conversion of menhadens into money. While wild fishes are being fed to farmed fishes, the farmed fishes are already on someone else's menu, sea lice. Sea lice is a generic term for many species of parasitic copepods that latch onto the bodies of fishes and other marine creatures and feed off their living tissues. In the wild, sea lice do not pose a major threat. But in the artificial conditions of intensive confinement, where the next host fish is just inches away, sea lice thrive. As they chew through the mucus, flesh, and eyes of fishes helpless to escape them, sea louse heaven becomes farmed fish hell. Overall death rates of 10% to 30% are considered acceptable in fish farming. The nets that hold fishes in their sea pens do not prevent these rampant parasites from escaping. A female sea louse lays about 22,000 eggs during her 7-month lifespan, and they spread in clouds over miles of surrounding waters, wreaking havoc on wild fishes who find themselves in the vicinity of the farms. The lice are credited with causing massive die-offs of 80% of wild pink salmons on Canada's Pacific coast. Trickle-down effects impact salmon-dependent wildlife, bears, eagles, and orcas. Crowded fish farm conditions give rise to other problems. These include viral and bacterial diseases, such as infectious pancreatic necrosis, viral hemorrhagic septicemia, and epizootic hematopoietic necrosis, toxic chemicals used to treat them, and concentrated fish wastes. Alophthisa contaminate surrounding waters, affecting native fishes and their habitats. A single farm in Lake Nicaragua that raises tilapia, the most popular farmed fish flesh in the United States, equals the impact of 3.7 million chickens defecating in the water. Many farmed fishes escape through nets damaged by seals or storms, diluting the genetic viability of wild populations. Not only are they less viable, captive-reared fishes are less resourceful than their wild cousins. Brains, like muscles, need to be used to develop normally. Free-living fishes must learn to find prey and to recognize and handle it. But a mundane, unstimulating life of captivity stunts brain development and function. When hatchery-reared fishes are recaptured after release into the wild, their stomachs are often empty or filled with inanimate objects such as floating debris or stones that look like the pellets they were reared on. No wonder, the young fishes have had no chance to learn how to make a living in the wild. There is potential to address this with judicious captive training regimens. Aware of fish's observational learning abilities, the fish behaviorists Cullum Brown and Kevin Lalland have used a video of another fish eating live food to teach naive, hatchery-reared salmons to forage on live, novel prey items. But it seems doubtful whether training large numbers of dense-alike or dead captive fishesis economically or logistically feasible. A visit to a research facility. To gain some first-hand exposure to fish farming, I visited the Freshwater Institute, a small aquaculture research facility nestled in woodlands of the Potomac watershed near Shepherdstown, West Virginia. My host was Chris Good, a tall, pleasant man in his mid-30s. He was hired at the Freshwater Institute after completing veterinary and doctoral degrees at the Ontario Veterinary College, University of Guelph, Canada, where he focused on the epidemiology of fishes. FI's objective is to advance the sustainability of aquaculture through numerous avenues, including research to improve the welfare of farmed fishes. It operates on a smaller scale than a typical commercial fish farm. Chris showed me into the main warehouse, containing about a dozen cylindrical tanks reminiscent of brewery vats. The din of machinery and pumps was so loud that we had to shout to hear each other. The largest tank, 30 feet across and 5 feet deep, contained about 4,000 to 5,000 foot-long salmon smolts, each about 14 months old. A porthole revealed layers of greenish-brown fishes gliding effortlessly in an eternal circle. Patches of silvery scales glinted in the dim light. Automated feeders dispensed feed pellets into the tank every 1 or 2 hours, depending on a predetermined feeding regime. Bags of fish feed were stacked against the warehouse wall. I looked at the long ingredient list, which included poultry oil, fish oil, vegetable oil, and wheat gluten. It did not mention any fish species names, but menhaden was almost certainly in there. Chris opened a bag so I could see the small, deep burgundy pellets, each about 1/5 of an inch across, which reminded me of dry cat food. I tasted one. The consistency resembled a hard graham cracker. The taste was faintly oily and salty, but otherwise bland. We visited small vats with hundreds of young salmon par just 1 inch or 2 long. We discussed jaw deformities, diarrhea outbreaks, research protocols, and dominance hierarchies. Our tour finished at the end of a building where the fishes are slaughtered. At FI, slaughter is preceded by 7 days of no feeding, which is intended to purge fishes of off flavor, which can accumulate in muscle tissue of fishes from certain rearing systems and lowers palatability to consumers. Chris told me that some brood fishes used for egg production are starved for 7 or 8 months in the belief that this increases the quality of their eggs, which he considers abhorrent from a welfare perspective. Chris showed me the holding tank to which fishes are transferred just before they meet their end. It's a stainless steel affair about 8 feet long, rectangular at the deep end, with a midsection that narrows into a funnel at the business end. Mounted onto the funnel is a pneumatic device that delivers a stunning blow to the fish's head when it is forced to swim through the funnel. Simultaneously, a sharp blade flicks out on each side to slice open the gills for bleeding out. Chris reports that the device is highly effective on the occasions when a fish is not killed, such as when it enters the funnel facing the wrong way, or when it is upside down. A worker at the spill trough beyond the stunner killer uses a handheld club to whack the fish on the head. He cautioned, however, that his facility's slow pace of killing helps keep the slaughter operation running smoothly, and that the story could be different in larger industry settings. Dying to be eaten. Commercial fish stunners are the state of the art in fish killing. Most of the great masses of fishes killed for our consumption die differently. Out at sea, a single purse seine hull may contain 500,000 fishes if they are herrings, or if they are a larger species, like Chilean jack mackerels, then a net can contain 100,000. Fishes caught this way are crushed by the weight of thousands of others as the net is tightened and hauled to the surface to be winched on board. Sometimes a submersible pump is lowered into the purse to suck the fishes up like a vacuum cleaner, then deposit them into dewatering boxes, then into holds below deck. Any fish who survives these events will most likely die from oxygen starvation as her beating gills futilely try to extract oxygen from air. If you are a fish caught on a long line hook, you languish impaled for hours, sometimes days, before being dragged a mile or more to the boat deck. There, if not already dead, you usually succumb to suffocation. You may also sustain bites from predators from which, needless to say, you are helpless to escape. Deeper-dwelling fishes face another peril, decompression. Decompression wreaks havoc on fishes because their gas-filled swim bladders, which function in buoyancy control, expand when the fish is hoisted toward the surface. As the swim bladder inflates, it presses against neighboring organs, which can cause their collapse and failure. More than a dozen studies published between 1964 and 2011 document lethal or sublethal injuries to commercially or recreationally fished species due to decompression. It's a nauseating list: esophageal aversion, exophthalmia, bulging of the eye from its orbit, arterial embolism, kidney embolism, hemorrhage, organ torsion, damaged or displaced organs surrounding the swim bladder, and cloacal prolapse, a fish version of one's rectum turning inside out and emerging from the body. Fishes raised in captivity do not have to die from decompression, crushing, or on a hook, but they don't exactly have it lucky. A 2002 review of fish slaughter studies concluded that the degree to which fishes suffer is very high when they are bled out, decapitated, put in a salt or ammonia bath, or electrocuted. Suffocation on ice, carbon dioxide narcosis, and anoxic water bath were classified as causing less but still high suffering. Some of these methods can cause immobility before loss of sensibility, leading to the illusion that suffering has ceased when it has not. Dying on ice is deemed welfare unfriendly for fishes because it prolongs the process of suffocation. At room temperature, it takes an adult salmon about 2.5 minutes to lose consciousness and 11 minutes before all movement stops, whereas at near freezing temperatures it takes much longer, more than 9 minutes and more than 3 hours, respectively. Collateral damage. If killing captive fishes is little better than killing wild ones, at least fish farmers know who they're taking. In the wild, fishermen do not catch only what they are targeting. Nets and hooks are indifferent to whom they catch. Unwanted fishes and other animals caught incidentally in the pursuit of the targeted species are referred to as bycatch. In commercial fishing, bycatch includes all 7 kinds of sea turtles, dozens of seabirds, including albatrosses, gannets, shearwaters, razorbills, and petrels, practically every species of dolphin and whale, countless invertebrates, living corals, and, of course, a huge range of fish species. Because they are unwanted, they are typically thrown away. Bycatch is common, very common. Estimates of how many sea creatures we toss back as unwanted waste vary, but they are consistently eye-popping. Try to visualize a pile of marine creatures weighing 200 million pounds, most of them dead, almost all doomed to die. That's the daily bycatch we reap from the seas. According to the Fisheries and Aquaculture Department of the Food and Agriculture Organization, global yearly bycatch rates have been dropping from around 29 million tons in the 1980s down to 7 million tons by 2001. Some credit for this might go to more selective fishing gear and improved rules intended to reduce bycatch. But the trend is deceptive. The estimates from 1994 and 2005 that appear to show a decline cannot be reliably compared because they were calculated so differently. And, as targeted species have declined, fishermen have simply kept more of what used to be tossed overboard. Lower value creatures, formerly discarded as trash, are being kept for human or animal food. It's for this reason that a quartet of wildlife analysts, chiefly with World Wildlife Fund International, proposed expanding the definition of bycatch to include unmanaged catch, non-target creatures nevertheless kept but for which no sustainable management plan exists. By this definition, bycatch today makes up 40% of the total global fish catch. Some fisheries are more wasteful than others. Most notorious for their bycatch rates are shrimp fisheries. Because shrimp scuttle about on the bottom, catching them involves running those trawls we met earlier. Unwanted fish-to-shrimp weight ratios average 1 to 1 to 3 to 1 for southeastern U.S. shrimp fisheries. Overall, 105 fish species have been recorded as bycatch on U.S. shrimp trawlers. Bycatch has an insidious cousin, ghost nets. Fishing fleets abandon or lose many untold miles of synthetic fiber drift nets and bottom-set gill nets every year, about 640,000 tons of derelict gear in total, according to a recent analysis by World Animal Protection. These phantom menaces float beyond the grasp of human greed and continue entangling animals. The primary victims, dolphins, seals, seabirds, and sea turtles, become bait for other marine life, some of whom also become ensnared, until finally, by the sheer weight of all the dead bodies, the nets sink to the bottom of the sea. Are we doing anything about the bycatch and ghost fishing debacles? Yes, and there has been some progress. Passage of the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1972 helped cut yearly dolphin mortality in the U.S. tuna fishery from about 500,000 to 20,000. Further measures eventually brought the dolphin kill rate down to an estimated 3,000 per year by the mid-1990s. But dolphin populations have not recovered, and this is just one fishery. Worldwide, some 300,000 small whales, dolphins, and porpoises still die from entanglement in fishing nets each year, making this the leading killer of small cetaceans. The situation is similar with seabirds. Baited longlines and wire struts called warp lines on trawlers had been killing about 100,000 albatrosses and petrels a year. Then, in 2008, the Albatross Task Force, a UK charity, showed in a pilot test off South Africa that the simple tactic of tying reusable pink strips, whose flapping motion has a scarecrow effect, to the lines and wires could cut the toll by 85%. Under a multilateral agreement to protect pelagic seabirds, such simple bird-scaring designs are now recommended for implementation industry-wide. But albatrosses remain in big trouble, with 17 of the 22 species considered vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered, and the remaining 5 classified as near threatened by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. In words often attributed to Joseph Stalin, a single death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic. When we are confronted with the astronomical numbers of animals who fall victim to our ocean plundering, we struggle to make an emotional connection to them. But if we were to interact with any one of those dolphins, those albatrosses, or for that matter any of the anonymous fishes hauled up to their deaths, we would come to know them as individuals. They would become someone's, not something's. Finned. There are other ways to waste life at sea. Enter the world of shark finning. The practice involves catching sharks and cutting off their fins and tails to be used in shark fin soup, prized as a delicacy in China and other parts of Asia. Shark finning is as brutal as it is profitable. Because handling large, muscular animals with sharp teeth on a slippery boat deck is dangerous work, killing them adds another layer of peril. So in the interest of speed and efficiency, fishermen routinely slice the fins off the shark and throw the still-living animal overboard to die of blood loss, suffocation, or compression as it slowly sinks into the abyss. Iris Ho, with Humane Society International in Washington, D.C., is one of a growing cadre of campaigners working to end the shark fin trade. Having grown up in Taiwan, Ho has first-hand experience with shark fin soup from the days before she turned to animal protection. For centuries, shark fins were a rare extravagance reserved mainly for emperors, and it was not until the 1960s that advance in catching technologies made shark fins available to a broader class of consumers. By 2011, somewhere between 26 million and 73 million sharks were being slaughtered for their fins each year. In an era of expanding animal and ocean advocacy stoked by the rapid dissemination of information via the internet, ending shark finning has become a cause célèbre. A celebrity-driven campaign by the charity WildAid features the likes of Jackie Chan, David Beckham, and the basketball star Yao Ming. Revered in his native China, Yao appears in public service announcements, turning away shark fin soup when it is offered at a restaurant and urging others to do the same. Humane Society International has focused on community engagement campaigns, and momentum has grown. Chinese students designed campaigns to raise community awareness. One Walmart store in a major city of China showed shark movies on TV screens in its store and sponsored a no shark fin pledge. As part of an austerity campaign against wasteful spending, the Chinese government issued a policy pronouncement against serving shark fins at official functions. These campaigns are working. WildAid reports that 85% of surveyed Chinese consumers have given up shark fin soup within the past 3 years. As of late 2014, shark fin sales had dropped 82% in Guangzhou, which has replaced Hong Kong as China's shark fin trading hub, and retail and wholesale prices there had dropped by 47% and 57%, respectively, in 2 years. Dozens of commercial airlines have stopped shipping shark fins, and high-end hotel chains have removed shark fin dishes from their menus. It remains to be seen how sharks will weather what surely must be the greatest assault ever to afflict their kind since their first ancestors appeared 450 million years ago. A shark's fins are not the only source of his woes. The trade in his meat has grown by 42% since 2000, totaling more than £258 million. Despite having banned the finning of sharks at sea, the United States exported nearly 84,000 pounds of shark fins in 2011. How ironic it is that we have viewed sharks as fearsome killers when the ratio of their toll on us to our toll on them is about 1 to 5 million. Small wonder that some shark researchers are pursuing studies aimed at ending shark fishing. Gone fishin'. Commercial fishing, aquaculture, bycatch, and finning are all elements of fishing for monetary gain. What sort of impact might recreational fishing be having on fishes? The United States Fish and Wildlife Service describes recreational fishing, also known as angling or sport fishing, as one of the nation's most popular outdoor activities, attracting 33.1 million individuals 16 years old and older in 2011. Worldwide, more than 1 in 10 humans engages regularly in recreational fishing. Peer inside a sport fishing magazine, of which at least 30 are currently published in the United States, and you'll quickly see that recreational fishing is big business. In 2013, the American Sport Fishing Association estimated that America's anglers spent $46 billion on fishing equipment, transportation, lodging, and other associated expenses. While the unsustainability and cruelty of commercial fishing are increasingly recognized, recreational fishing retains a benign and beloved place in our culture. To wit, fishing scenes frequently appear in advertisements for pharmaceuticals and retirement communities, goods that have nothing directly to do with fishing. Is angling really so benign? I doubt the fishes think so. Being hooked through the mouth and forcibly transferred into an environment that causes suffocation certainly doesn't sound like something any of us would choose for an afternoon of peaceful recreation. If you've ever tried to remove a standard, barbed hook from a fish's mouth, you'll know that the barb is there for a reason, and the reason is not to make life easier for the fish. That little spur can cause damage to a fish's facial tissues even when it is removed carefully, and especially if it is forcefully torn out. I can still remember the dogged resistance posed by hooks, and the crackling sound they made as I worked them out with my inexperienced hands during my brief childhood fishing career. It is mostly up to chance which part of a fish's face gets impaled when a fisherman yanks the line upon detecting a nibble. Eye damage from hooks is surprisingly common, earning mention in a number of fishing studies. In a study of stream salmon, 1 in 10 landed fishes sustained eye damage severe enough to be deemed likely to cause prolonged or permanent impaired vision. Nowadays, anglers have the option of using barbless hooks, which can either be purchased or rendered that way with a pair of pliers. Barbless hooks probably originated in the United Kingdom, where catch-and-release fishing has been practiced for more than a century to prevent target species from disappearing in heavily fished waters. Hook extraction is easier with barbless hooks, and it can often be done without removing the fish from the water. Hooks are not the only source of death and injury to recreationally caught fishes. The handling required to manage an unhappy wild creature is often necessarily rough. The protective, slimy layer of mucus surrounding the scales may be damaged by hands, landing nets, and hook extraction tools, leaving the fish more vulnerable to disease. Landing nets cause injuries ranging from severe fin abrasion to loss of scales and mucus, resulting in death rates from 4% to 14%. Pathogens also lurk. In a study of 242 largemouth bases caught in fishing tournaments and kept in submerged cages for 4 days of observation, 4 species of virulent bacteria were found in 42 of 76 fishes with damaged skin. Another 8% had died before they were weighed at capture, and a further 25% died during the holding period, bringing the total death rate to 1 in 3 and suggesting that at least some of the infections were lethal. Lastly, one might think that recreational fishing does not involve the decompression injuries sustained by fishes caught in deep-sea commercial fishing. In fact, some recreationally caught fishes are at sufficient depths to cause decompression injuries during the fish's forced transit to the surface. Nevertheless, a fish usually survives if quickly returned to the depths, and tools for doing this include a weighted crate that can be lowered and opened with a rope, and a commercial fish descender. Eaten. Whether the catch is commercial or recreational, when we eat fishes we are usually eating wildlife. Because humans prefer the taste of larger predatory fishes such as tunas, groupers, swordfishes, and mackerels, fisheries have tended to target them. During the 20th century, humans have reduced the biomass of predatory fishes by more than 2/3, and most of this alarming decline has occurred since the 1970s. Sylvia O. puts it this way: think of everything in the fish market as bush meat. These are the eagles, the owls, the lions, the tigers, the snow leopards, the rhinoceroses of the ocean. Perhaps no fish better exemplifies our consumption of wild predators than tunas. Eating tunas is like eating tigers. Like tigers, tunas are charismatic apex predators. And like tigers, tunas are big. The largest Atlantic bluefin tunas outsize the largest tiger, measuring nearly 10 feet and weighing 1,500 pounds, bristling with muscle and shaped like a bullet. A speeding tuna is as fast as an ambushing tiger. Lying at the top of their food chain, tunas require a lot of energy to fuel the growth and maintenance of their bodies. A tuna consumes her body weight in prey animals about every 10 days. No thanks to the stacks of canned tuna grinning on grocery store shelves, most of the commercially fished species are in trouble. Atlantic and Pacific bluefin tunas are especially endangered, with populations estimated to be down by 85% and 96%, respectively, since 1960. One of the dilemmas of approaching extinction is that, as you become rarer, you become more precious, which in turn makes you more valuable as a commodity. Today, one bluefin tuna can sell for over $1 million. Ounce for ounce, that's twice the price of silver and a huge incentive for a commercial fisherman. Besides wildlife, there are other things we are eating when we eat a fish. Fish flesh is the most contaminated of all foods. Water flows downstream. Effluents find their way into organisms at the base of food chains, which in turn get concentrated through bioaccumulation as they move up food chains, ending up in the tissues of apex predators. Of 125,000 new chemicals developed since the Industrial Revolution, 85,000 have been found in fishes. It is well established that certain human demographics, most notably pregnant and nursing women and young children, are advised to limit consumption of fishes to avoid risk of exposure to mercury and other harmful chemicals. According to the physician Michael Greger, MD, the author of How Not to Die and host of the popular website Nutrition Facts. Fish consumption is a leading source of mercury, dioxins, neurotoxins, arsenic, DDT, putrescine, AGEs, PCBs, PDBs, and prescription drugs. Among the undesirable effects these contaminants can have on us are lowered intelligence, lower sperm counts, more symptoms of depression, anxiety, and stress, and earlier puberty. So far, none of this is affecting policies or behavior. On the contrary, for years now, people in developed countries have been encouraged to increase their intakes of fatty fish by at least 2 to 3-fold. The main problem with this advice, besides the fact that there are safer sources of omega-3 fatty acids than fish, is that it ignores the fact that feeding fishes to humans isn't sustainable even at current levels of consumption. This is not just an environmental problem, it is a geographic one. The combined effect of rising demand for fish and the collapse of fisheries is leading developed countries who can afford it, such as the United States, Japan, and European Union members, to increase imports from developing countries. The added pressure placed on these countries' coastal fishing grounds deprives local people of an important protein source for the sake of the developed world, whose major problems include overnutrition and physical inactivity. Having witnessed the sharp decline in populations of fishes during her lifetime, Elle made a personal decision to stop eating them. Ask yourself this, she says. Is it more important to you to consume fish, or to think of them as being here for a larger purpose? Whether what we catch is intentional or incidental, our toll on marine life is huge. A 2015 joint study from the WWF and the Zoological Society of London concluded that fish populations have between 1970 and 2012. Populations of some commercially heavily exploited species, including a group encompassing tuna, mackerel, and bonito, had fallen by almost 75%. It is easy to condemn the cruelty and waste rampant in the commercial fishing industries. But consumers must acknowledge their complicity. In any supply and demand economy, demand is the fuel that drives the engine of supply. When we eat fishes, we fund their capture. Is there any good news for fishes? Yes. Over the past quarter century, we have begun to take an unprecedented interest in animals as subjects of moral and ecological concern, and fishes are finally being swept into the current. If an animal is sentient, then it should be included in the moral circle, say 5 authors. From Veterinary, Theological, and Philosophical Disciplines in a 2007 article on the ethics of fish farming. Based on the clear evidence that they can feel pain, we may conclude that fishes should be given the benefit of the doubt. Epilogue. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Martin Luther King, Jr. Knowledge is a powerful thing, it informs ethics and fuels revolutions. Witness the end of colonialism and institutionalized slavery and the advancement of women's and civil rights. These were triumphs of reason stoked by a growing sense of moral revulsion. Injustices, be they driven by greed, narrow-mindedness, prejudice, or all three, wither in the face of informed reason. The color of one's skin, one's religion, or having a womb or other arbitrary traits are simply no grounds for exploitation. What about the number of legs, or having fins? The latter portion of the 20th century saw unprecedented advances in concern for animals, including the rise of an increasingly sophisticated and effective animal rights movement. These trends continue to accelerate in the 21st century. The Humane Society of the United States, the world's most influential animal protection organization, reports that more than 1,000 animal protection laws have been enacted in the United States since 2004, a number that rivals all of the animal protection laws enacted in American history prior to 2000. In 1985, animal cruelty was a felony crime in just 4 U.S. states. By 2014, all 50 states had enacted such legislation. The public outcry over the shooting of an iconic African lion named Cecil by an American dentist in July 2015 illustrates the growing sympathy for animals' plight. Within a week, Cecil had become a household name, and close to 1.2 million people signed an online Justice for Cecil petition. But a lion has a lot more charisma than a lionfish. I believe that the main source of our prejudices against fishes is their failure to show expressions that we associate with having feelings. Fish are always in another element, silent and unsmiling, legless and dead-eyed, writes Jonathan Safran Foer in Eating Animals. In those flat, glassy eyes we struggle to see anything more than a vacant stare. We hear no screams and see no tears when their mouths are impaled and their bodies pulled from the water. Their unblinking eyes, constantly bathed in water and thus in no need of lids, amplify the illusion that they feel nothing. With a deficit of stimuli that normally trigger our sympathy, we are thus numbed to the fish's plight. What we fail to account for when our sympathies falter is that the creature we are regarding is out of its element. Crying out in pain is as ineffective for a fish in air as crying out in pain is for us when we are submerged. Fishes are rigged to function, communicate, and express themselves underwater. Many do vocalize when they are hurt, but the sounds they produce evolve to pass through water, and rarely do we detect them. Even when we can notice signs of distress. Flipping, thrashing, gills opening and closing as the animal tries in vain to take in oxygen, if we are schooled in the belief that they are just reflexive, we may shrug it off as nothing to be concerned about. Today, we know far more about fishes than we did a century ago, even though what we know is a tiny fraction of what they know. Of the 30,000 plus fish species so far described, only a few hundred have been studied in any detail. The ones you have read about in this book are like celebrities among fishes. The most studied of them all, the zebrafish, Danio ririo, the laboratory rat of fishes, has been the subject of more than 25,000 published scientific papers, including more than 2,000 in 2015. This serves to illustrate the boundless depths of inquiry and discovery to which any of those 30,000 fish species could theoretically be subjected. The previous section focused mainly on the way we exploit and abuse fishes. But our relationship to fishes is certainly not universally bad, and as our knowledge expands, we are becoming less indifferent and more concerned for their welfare. When I did an informal online search for fish welfare, the database in GentaConnect yielded 71 hits, 69 of which were published since 2002. During the years I researched this book, I heard from dozens of correspondents who adore fishes and would never seek to harm them. What many of these people like about fishes is not that they are like us. What is beautiful about them, and equally worthy of respect, is how they are not like us. Their different ways of being in the world are a source of fascination and admiration, and cause for sympathy. We can connect across the great divide that separates us, as when I have felt the gentle tugs of discus fishes rising to pluck food from my fingertips, or when a grouper fish approaches a trusted diver to receive caresses. Among other things, fishes use their brains to survive and flourish, and one of the ways I have sought to raise the status of fishes has been to draw attention to their awareness and cognitive skill. But extolling the mental virtuous of other species inflates the importance of intelligence, when intelligence really has little to do with moral standing. We do not deny basic moral rights to persons with developmental disabilities. Sentience, the capacity to feel, to suffer pain, to experience joy, is the bedrock of ethics. It is what qualifies one for the moral community. Moral progress is good, and it is happening. Despite what we find in headlines, rates of human violence have declined significantly compared with historic levels. In his sweeping book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, the psychologist Steven Pinker outlines a family of civilizing processes to explain this trend. Among them, the rise of democracies, the empowerment of women, the expansion of literacy, the formation of a global community, and the advance of reason. Today, new ideas spread almost instantaneously and seamlessly to all corners of the globe. Kickstarter campaigns generate funding groundswells for socially progressive projects, and independent foundations help get new ideas airborne. Ever since we developed the concept of law, animals have been considered the legal property of humans. Yet even this fundamental paradigm, so deeply enshrined in our anthropocentric consciousness, is starting to shift. Local ordinance changed animals' legal status from property to companion in at least 18 U.S. cities since 2000. Depending on where you live, you might be one of more than 6 million Americans and Canadians officially recognized as animal guardians. In May 2015, a New York Supreme Court judge held a hearing for two chimpanzees, used for years in invasive experiments at Stony Brook University, to have their rights defended by human attorneys for unlawful imprisonment. Lawyers with the Non-Human Rights Project are preparing to file further lawsuits on behalf of other animals. Through laws, policy, and action, fishes are beginning to take their place in the moral community. In parts of Europe, it is now unlawful to keep a goldfish, a naturally social animal who can live for decades, alone in a barren fishbowl. A law enacted in April 2008 by the Swiss Federal Parliament requires anglers to complete a course on catching fishes more humanely. The Dutch government has clearly stated the need for better stunning and killing methods for fishes, and the Foundation for the Protection of Fish has begun lobbying to turn those words into action. In Germany, a 2013 law requires that all fishes be rendered unconscious before slaughter, and fishing tournaments where the catch is weighed before being thrown back in the water have been banned, along with the use of